More than a week after the city cleared tents from Mass and Cass, enforcing a new citywide ban on encampments, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu says she's optimistic about her administration's efforts to address the crises of homelessness and addiction in that area.
We feel very confident that this is an approach that we'll be able to sustain over the long run.
Unlike after past sweeps of Mass and Cass, the mayor told GBH News' Victoria Bedford on Greater Boston that they haven't yet seen a new wave of tents pop up across the city. The mayor and her coordinated response director, Tanya Del Rio, also said they were able to find temporary housing for more than 100 people who'd been living in the area. But what about people who didn't end up with a place to stay? And what about the role of law enforcement in all of this? Tori Bedford joins me now. Tori, you've covered Mass and Cass for a long time. You've covered previous clearances. Was there something fundamentally different about this one? And if so, what was it?
So because of this ordinance, which is a law, the city previously was required to give people 48 hours notice if they were to take down someone's tent, and now police can go in under threat of arrest and have someone take their tent down. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the main difference. I think in where we're at in the state, there's just significantly less shelter. There's fewer shelter options, and people were moved into shelter. Many people, as you mentioned, were moved into low-threshold housing, but I think previously the focus was maybe more on housing, and now there's a little more focus on shelter.
Am I what's differentiate between housing and shelter? Because I think of them as the same.
So a lot of people think of them as the same, and I think that that is kind of one of the issues with all of these clearings as they happen, is that low threshold housing is a room that is yours, and you have a key and a door, and you might be able. Low threshold just means that if you are someone who is currently using drugs, that you're allowed to continue to do so without having to go through detox in order to kind of earn that housing. And shelter is usually a congregate shelter setting, not always congregate, but a shelter setting where you're living maybe with multiple people, and you have the bed, maybe you have an agreement where you have the bed, but you might just have it for a night, right? And people tend to stay less time in shelter.
Okay, and in this case it was about 70 people put in low threshold housing,
yeah,
right?
73.
And 30, give or take, put in a shelter situation?
Yeah, and some people were given specific, they worked with individuals to find specific shelter situations that were best suited to them. Like there were some younger people, there were people who needed special accommodations, so those are arranged. Yeah.
I know advocates who are opposed to clearances like this in Boston, but across the country, warn that there are public health consequences when they occur. What are the concerns that people have about this type of approach?
So there's a huge body of research about the impact of clearing tents and of police intervention and incarceration, involuntary commitment, involuntary rehabilitation for people. So much has been studied and researched about this, to the point where, we've been doing this in Boston for so long that there have been studies that have come out from previous clearings here, including Operation Clean Sweep, which was one in 2019 that former Mayor Marty Walsh conducted.
And what are some of the biggest negative
their concerns are just that people tend to overdose, that the overdose death rate heightens, that people are displaced, and it's harder to find people. It's harder. Maybe
aren't connected with healthcare providers, for example.
Right. And I spoke to a psychologist there who had worked with folks down there. She works at MGH, and she was saying that she's concerned that, some people will be placed in low threshold housing. Those people will hopefully be able to be moved through programs and access resources, but other people who maybe have previous warrants or were placed in shelter, they might just get on the train and just keep going, and the on-ramp off of Copley near Back Bay Station is like, there are people living under bridges now, and there are people hiding out, there are people moving to different areas, and those people will be harder to find.
That's really interesting, and it makes me wonder, is there speculation that this clearance and this focus on Mass and Cass is simply going to end up dispersing that population throughout the city rather than having them concentrated there?
So the mayor has emphasized that enforcement will be happening throughout the entire city. She sent out outreach teams. There's additional police presence, and they are trying to crack down on encampments. One thing that's really interesting that's come up is that they will need to involve state police on DCR property, on parks property, on any kind of state park. So some of the encampments that have actually come up there have been brought up and were brought up in city council sessions about the ordinance, because that, actually enforcing that, and there's a jurisdictional issue that they'll need to figure out.
I want to roll a bite from your interview with the mayor, where she talks about this central booking system that was implemented in connection with this clearance. Let's take a look.
We have actually implemented a central booking rather than being held in the individual police precinct closest to where they were taken into custody, where our precincts aren't set up with food or medical care or really, arrangements for that. Folks are taken now to Suffolk County, taken to the House of Corrections.
So there you have the mayor casting central booking as the sort of holistic, maybe more accommodating approach, but not everyone likes the idea of it, right?
It's highly controversial, and the legality, I think, is questionable. I'm not sure about all of the specifics of that, but, it has been proposed in every legislative session, and it has not yet passed as something that the sheriff can do. So they have an arrangement to bring people in. People are being held pre-arraignment. So, they haven't gone through the precinct. They don't necessarily maybe have the resources to know what their bail might be. There's a lot. I think the point is to be able to give people medical resources and to be able to, give people help that they need, because this is a very vulnerable population. But it's highly controversial, and it's not something that's been previously publicized as a part of this ordinance. She also mentioned that no arrests have been made in connection to the ordinance, and she, I think, meant that people have not refused to take down their tents and been arrested because of that. But the ordinance language actually specifies that any kind of public disturbance, drinking, swearing, anything, you can be arrested without a warrant and brought in pre-arraignment into the central booking system.
Well, have there been arrests made not for refusing to take down a tent, but for other things?
I don't know. I mean, I've reached out to the police department several days ago, several times, the sheriff, the DA. I've asked the jails about it, and I would think it would be highly unusual that in that entire area no arrests have occurred, because the police said that they would increase enforcement with the increased presence, and they mentioned people who were preying on other people. They also said that differentiation is made on a case-by-case basis, but I can't
say definitively.
I don't know.
All right.
You always have me on here saying, I don't know.
Ambiguity is good to highlight.
You're not supposed to do that on TV.
No. It's good to know what we know
I don't know.
and what we don't know.
I don't know. All right.
Tori Bedford, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.